Some women survive betrayal. Others survive attempted destruction. The scream ripped through St. Matthew Medical Center just after 11:40 p.m. Nurses froze mid-step as a metal tray crashed across the polished hospital floor. A heart monitor began shrieking somewhere down the maternity wing, sharp and relentless, the kind of sound that made every doctor in the building run faster. Emily Carter hit the wall beside room 814 with one hand wrapped protectively around her 8-month pregnant stomach while pain spread through her lower back in hot waves. Her breathing turned shallow. The pale blue hospital gown trembled against her skin under the fluorescent lights. Across from her stood Vanessa Blake in a cream designer coat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her diamond earrings catching the sterile white glow of the hallway like tiny knives. "You should have disappeared months ago," Vanessa said coldly. Emily stared at her in disbelief, one trembling hand gripping the rail beside the wall. "Vanessa, please, not here." But Vanessa stepped closer, heels clicking against marble with terrifying calm. "Nathan was supposed to build an empire with me," she whispered, "not waste his future babysitting you." The baby kicked hard inside Emily's stomach. A violent wave of dizziness hit her all at once. She tried to steady herself, but her knees weakened. Then the monitor attached to her wrist began beeping wildly. "Stop," Emily gasped. "You're stressing the baby." Vanessa reached forward and yanked one of the monitor wires loose. The machine screamed louder. A nurse appeared at the far end of the hallway just as Emily lost balance and slammed against the side table outside the room. Medical files scattered across the floor. "Call the ER," the nurse shouted instantly. Now, everything became noise after that. Running footsteps. Wheels screeching across tile. A doctor yelling for a fetal monitor. Emily slid downward slowly until she was sitting against the wall, both hands over her stomach while tears blurred her vision. Then she saw him. Nathan Cole stepped out of the elevator in a charcoal suit worth more than most people's cars, his phone still in his hand. For one brief second, Emily thought her husband would run to her. Instead, he rushed straight to Vanessa. "What happened?" he demanded, grabbing the mistress by the shoulders first. Vanessa's glossy eyes filled instantly with fake tears. "She attacked me," she whispered. Emily felt something inside her break far worse than pain. Not her body, not even her marriage. Hope. The doctor beside her pressed cold fingers against her wrist. "Ma'am, stay awake for me." Emily could barely hear him over the roaring in her ears. Nathan finally looked toward her, but there was no panic in his face. No love, only irritation. Like she had become another problem interrupting his night. Emily remembered the tiny apartment they once shared before the luxury penthouse, before the billion-dollar company, before the cameras and charity galas and assistants who looked at her like she no longer belonged beside him. She had stayed beside Nathan when he had nothing except debt and ambition. Now he looked at her like an inconvenience wrapped in a hospital gown. Another contraction of pain hit her stomach. She cried out softly and folded forward. The nurse beside her immediately looked toward the monitor. "Doctor, fetal heart rate is dropping." The hallway exploded into motion again. Emily's vision flickered under the bright hospital lights while someone rolled a gurney toward her. Nathan still hadn't moved closer. Vanessa clung to his arm dramatically while whispering something in his ear. Then the nurse beside Emily asked the question that changed everything. "Who's her emergency contact?" Emily's lips trembled. 7 years. 7 years since she had spoken to the man she was about to name. 7 years since she abandoned her billionaire family to marry Nathan against everyone's warnings. Her voice barely came out above a whisper. "Richard. Carter." Silence spread strangely fast through the hallway. One doctor looked up immediately. The older nurse near the station went pale. Even Nathan's expression changed for half a second. Because everyone in the city knew Richard Carter, the billionaire real estate titan who owned half the skyline. The man newspapers called ruthless. The man Emily once called Dad. Somewhere beyond the hospital windows, thunder rolled across the city skyline, while the maternity monitor continued its frantic cry. And 52 minutes later, a black helicopter descended onto the roof of St. Matthew Medical Center. The storm had not stopped by morning. Rainwater streaked down the massive glass windows of Richard Carter's penthouse office 70 floors above downtown Chicago, while television screens silently replayed helicopter footage from outside St. Matthew Medical Center. Reporters crowded beneath umbrellas. Headlines crawled across the bottom of every channel. Billionaire heiress hospitalized after late-night incident. Inside the room, no one spoke above a whisper. Emily sat curled beneath a cashmere blanket on the leather sofa near the fireplace, pale and exhausted, one hand resting over the gentle curve of her stomach while distant thunder rolled beyond the skyline. The baby had stabilized overnight, but the fear still lived inside her body like ice water beneath the skin. Across the room, Richard Carter stood beside a conference table covered with printed documents, hospital records, and surveillance stills. Every few seconds another phone vibrated. Another executive. Another politician. Another reporter asking for comments. Richard ignored all of them. "Run the timeline again," he said calmly. A security analyst tapped the tablet screen immediately. Footage from the hospital hallway appeared once more. Vanessa entering. Vanessa leaving. Nathan arriving less than 2 minutes later. Too fast. Too perfect. Richard watched the sequence silently until Olivia Hayes entered the room carrying another medical file. Her expression alone changed the temperature in the room. "The second lab confirmed it," she said quietly. Emily looked up immediately. "Confirmed what?" Olivia hesitated carefully before answering. "The medication in your bloodstream did not come from the hospital." Emily's breathing slowed. "What kind of medication?" Olivia placed the file on the table. Low-dose compounds designed to trigger stress responses during pregnancy. Elevated blood pressure. Dehydration. Premature contractions. Silence. Heavy and cold. Emily stared blankly at the floor while memories rose one after another like ghosts. Nathan bringing her tea every night. Nathan insisting she rest more often because she looked tired. Nathan handing her pills in unlabeled containers with soft, reassuring smiles. Doctor-approved vitamins, he always called them. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. "Oh my God." Richard looked toward Olivia. "Could it have harmed the baby?" Eventually, Olivia admitted softly. "Yes." The room went still. Even the rain outside seemed quieter for one impossible second. Emily suddenly stood too fast from the sofa, breathing unevenly. No, her voice cracked instantly. Nathan would never. But even she could not finish the sentence anymore. Because deep down she remembered all the moments she ignored. The growing distance. The late-night calls. The way he stopped touching her stomach whenever the baby kicked. The coldness that replaced affection almost overnight. Emily pressed trembling fingers against her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "I thought he stopped loving me," she whispered. "I did not think he wanted this." Richard crossed the room slowly. Not as a billionaire. Not as the most feared businessman in the city. Just a father watching his daughter fall apart piece by piece. "Emily." She looked at him with red, exhausted eyes. "You warned me." Richard said nothing because there was nothing left to say. 7 years ago, Emily walked away from one of the wealthiest families in America for Nathan Cole. She believed she was choosing love over privilege. Richard believed she was marrying ambition wrapped in charm. Both of them lost something that day, but only one of them nearly lost everything. The silence shattered when one of Richard's attorneys rushed into the room carrying a laptop. "Sir," he said breathlessly, "you need to see this now." The screen displayed a live social media stream from downtown. Cameras flashed across a red carpet outside the Grand Aurora Hotel, where workers prepared for Nathan Cole's billion-dollar merger gala later that evening. Reporters swarmed the entrance while giant digital banners rotated Nathan's smiling face beside the words "The Future of Cole Enterprises." Then another image appeared. Vanessa Blake stepping from a black SUV in a silver dress, smiling confidently at cameras less than 12 hours after Emily nearly lost her child. Emily froze completely. "She is there." Her voice sounded hollow. The attorney nodded grimly. "And according to sources, Nathan plans to publicly announce their relationship tonight." Olivia muttered softly under her breath. Unbelievable. But Richard simply stared at the screen without emotion. That was always the frightening thing about him. The calmer he looked, the more dangerous the situation became. One reporter shoved a microphone toward Vanessa during the live stream. "Miss Blake, are rumors true that Nathan Cole's marriage is officially over?" Vanessa smiled directly into the cameras. "Some people are finally getting the life they deserve." Emily looked away instantly like the words physically hurt her. But Richard did not blink. "Prepare the cars," he said quietly. Every person in the room looked toward him. "Sir." Richard adjusted the cuff of his black suit jacket with slow, deliberate precision. "Nathan Cole believes tonight is a celebration. He finally turned toward the skyline, where lightning illuminated the storm clouds above Chicago. By midnight, he said calmly, his entire world is going to collapse on live television. By 7:30 that evening, the Grand Aurora Hotel looked less like a charity gala and more like the center of the universe. Black SUVs lined the entrance for nearly half a block, while cameras flashed non-stop beneath towering gold lights that illuminated the rain-soaked Chicago streets like a movie premiere. Reporters crowded behind velvet barriers, shouting questions at celebrities, investors, and politicians arriving beneath umbrellas held by security teams in tailored black suits. Inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers reflected against polished marble floors, while a string quartet played soft music near the massive stage where Nathan Cole planned to announce the largest merger in his company's history. Every television network in the city covered the event live. Nathan stood near the center of the ballroom, adjusting the sleeve of his tuxedo while executives surrounded him, offering congratulations. To anyone watching, he looked untouchable, confident, successful, the perfect billionaire entrepreneur. But beneath the cameras and applause, his attention kept drifting toward the ballroom entrance every few seconds. Vanessa noticed immediately. "Relax," she whispered beside him, slipping one manicured hand around his arm. Her silver gown shimmered beneath the lights with every movement. "Nobody is thinking about the hospital anymore." Nathan forced a smile, but tension still pulled at the corners of his face. "Richard Carter does not disappear quietly." Vanessa rolled her eyes lightly. "Your wife signed away her family years ago. Her father is not going to destroy his reputation over some emotional breakdown." Nathan looked toward the reporters again without answering. Deep down, something felt wrong. It started an hour earlier when 3 investors suddenly canceled private meetings without explanation. Then 2 board members stopped returning his calls. Then the stock analyst from New York quietly left the gala before dinner even started. Tiny cracks. But Nathan built his empire understanding that tiny cracks eventually became disasters. Across the ballroom, giant LED screens displayed promotional videos celebrating Cole Enterprises while guests sipped champagne and discussed billion-dollar deals beneath the glow of crystal light. Then one of Nathan's assistants rushed toward him, pale and breathless. "Sir," she whispered urgently, "Richard Carter just arrived." The room changed instantly. Conversation slowed. Glasses lowered. Even the music suddenly felt quieter. Because Richard Carter was not simply rich. He was power. Old power. The kind built across generations that could erase companies with a phone call. Nathan turned toward the entrance just as the ballroom doors opened. Richard Carter entered wearing a black suit and dark overcoat, silver hair perfectly combed back, his expression unreadable beneath the flashing cameras. Beside him walked Emily. A collective gasp moved through the ballroom like wind through trees. Emily Carter should have been resting in a hospital bed. Instead, she stood beside her father in a long ivory maternity gown with one hand resting protectively against her stomach. She looked pale but composed, fragile but unbroken. The entire room stared. Reporters instantly pushed forward. "Mrs. Cole, is it true there was an altercation at the hospital?" "Mr. Carter, are you threatening legal action?" "Nathan, are divorce rumors confirmed?" Security blocked the cameras while Richard guided Emily calmly through the ballroom. Nathan froze completely when their eyes finally met across the crowded room. Emily barely recognized the man staring back at her now. Not because he looked different, because for the first time she saw him clearly. The ambition, the calculation, the panic hiding beneath expensive confidence. Vanessa recovered first. She stepped forward with a polished smile clearly designed for cameras. "Emily," she said sweetly, loud enough for nearby reporters to hear, "I am so relieved you are feeling better." Emily said nothing. Richard did. "Interesting," he replied calmly. "Considering you were the reason she ended up in the emergency room." Silence crashed down instantly around them. Vanessa's smile flickered. Nathan stepped in quickly. "Richard, this is not the place." "No." Richard glanced around the glittering ballroom. "I think this place is perfect." The tension became unbearable. Investors exchanged nervous looks. Camera operators moved closer, sensing blood in the water. Nathan lowered his voice sharply. "You are making a scene." Richard's eyes hardened slightly. "No, Nathan. You made the scene the moment you handed your mistress access to the maternity wing." Vanessa's face drained of color. Nathan stiffened instantly. You have no proof. Richard slowly reached into his jacket pocket. The movement alone made half the room stop breathing. He removed a small black remote control and pressed one button. The giant LED screens behind the stage suddenly went black. The music cut off mid-note. Confused murmurs spread through the ballroom. Then hospital security footage appeared across every screen in stunning clarity. Vanessa entering the maternity floor. Vanessa stepping inside Emily's room. Vanessa disconnecting medical equipment. Emily collapsing against the wall. Gasps exploded across the ballroom. One woman near the front covered her mouth in horror. Reporters surged forward like a tidal wave. Nathan turned white beneath the stage lights, while Vanessa stumbled backward in disbelief. "Turn it off," she whispered frantically. But the footage kept playing. Every second, every angle, every lie collapsing live in front of Chicago's wealthiest elite. Then came the final shot. Nathan arriving at the hospital and running straight to Vanessa instead of his pregnant wife. The ballroom erupted. The ballroom dissolved into chaos in less than 10 seconds. Reporters surged toward the stage so fast that security guards struggled to hold the line, while camera flashes exploded across the marble walls like lightning. Guests whispered frantically behind raised champagne glasses as the hospital footage continued playing on every giant screen in the Grand Aurora Hotel. Vanessa Blake stood frozen beneath the lights, her perfectly polished image collapsing frame by frame in front of Chicago's elite. "This is manipulated," she snapped suddenly, her voice shaking despite the confidence she tried to project. Richard Carter staged this. But nobody was looking at Richard anymore. They were looking at Nathan. Because the final image looping behind him was impossible to explain away. Nathan Cole arriving at the hospital and reaching for his mistress before his pregnant wife. Again and again. Every screen, every angle, every second destroying the carefully crafted image he spent years building. Nathan stepped toward the control booth near the stage. "Turn those screens off now." Nobody moved. Richard Carter remained perfectly calm near the center of the ballroom, while Emily stood beside him, pale beneath the crystal lights, but steady now in a way she had not felt for months. For the first time since entering the gala, people were not looking at her with pity. They were looking at her with shock, respect, sympathy. One reporter pushed through the crowd and shouted, "Mr. Cole, did you knowingly grant Vanessa Blake access to the maternity wing?" Another voice followed instantly. "Were you aware of the medication found in your wife's bloodstream?" Nathan stopped walking. The color drained slowly from his face. Emily noticed it immediately, that tiny flicker of fear in his eyes when he realized the medication had been discovered. Richard noticed it too. "Interesting reaction," Richard said calmly. The ballroom fell quieter. Nathan forced a cold laugh. "You are accusing me of poisoning my own wife based on assumptions." "No," Richard replied smoothly. "I am accusing you based on evidence." Another button clicked on the remote in his hand. New images appeared across the LED screens. Pharmacy records, security logs, financial transfers, a timeline stretching back nearly 6 months. Guests stared upward in disbelief as highlighted transactions connected directly to private wellness clinics Vanessa Blake had secretly visited using company accounts tied to Cole Enterprises. Olivia Hayes stepped beside Emily and quietly handed another document to one of the journalists near the front row. Within seconds, cameras turned toward Nathan again. "Dr. Hayes, are these official medical findings?" "Yes," Olivia answered clearly. The substances discovered in Emily Carter's blood were not prescribed through St. Matthew Medical Center. Vanessa suddenly grabbed Nathan's arm hard enough to wrinkle his tuxedo sleeve. "Say something," she hissed under her breath. "Fix this." But Nathan looked trapped now. Cornered. Every camera in Chicago focused directly on him, while social media notifications exploded across phones throughout the ballroom. Cole Enterprises stock began dropping in real time. 6%, then 11, then 17. Investors quietly started leaving the event without even collecting their coats. One older board member removed his company pin from his jacket entirely before walking toward the exit. Nathan saw it happen. Panic flashed across his face for the first time all night. "Nobody is leaving," he said sharply into the microphone near the stage. But people were already moving. Fast. Wealthy people understood danger better than anyone. And tonight Nathan Cole smelled like financial death. Emily watched the empire collapse around him with strange emotional numbness. Months ago, she would have cried, begged him to explain, tried to save him from himself. But standing beneath those lights now, hearing the whispers spread across the ballroom, she realized something terrifyingly simple. Nathan never loved anything he could not control. Another sudden commotion erupted near the hotel entrance. The massive doors swung open as several Chicago police officers entered alongside financial investigators carrying folders and sealed envelopes. Conversation stopped instantly. Vanessa's grip tightened around Nathan's arm. "No," she whispered. The lead investigator approached the stage calmly. "Nathan Cole," he announced clearly enough for every camera to capture the moment. "We have warrants regarding financial fraud, unlawful asset transfers, and an ongoing criminal investigation tied to the assault at St. Matthew Medical Center." Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. Nathan stepped backward in disbelief. "You cannot do this here." "Actually," Richard Carter said softly, "this is exactly where it needed to happen." Emily looked toward her father. For years she believed Richard only understood power and revenge. But tonight she finally understood something else. He was not humiliating Nathan out of cruelty. He was making sure Nathan could never bury the truth behind money again. Vanessa suddenly tried slipping toward a side exit, but two officers intercepted her before she reached the doors. Her face completely changed then. No more polished smiles. No more camera-ready confidence. Just fear, raw and visible beneath the ballroom lights. "Nathan," she said desperately, "do something." But Nathan could barely breathe now. His phone vibrated nonstop in his pocket while headlines updated live across the giant screens above him. Cole Enterprises under federal investigation. Billionaire gala turns into public scandal. Pregnant heiress speaks through legal team. The string quartet had stopped playing long ago. The ballroom now echoed only with camera shutters, hurried footsteps, and the sound of an empire breaking apart in real time. Emily rested one hand gently over her stomach as the baby moved softly beneath the fabric of her gown. For the first time in months, the movement no longer felt afraid. The first contraction hit Emily Carter just as federal agents escorted Vanessa Blake through the ballroom doors. It started low in her back, like pressure tightening around her spine, before spreading sharply across her stomach hard enough to steal the air from her lungs. Emily grabbed the edge of a marble table beside her as crystal glasses rattled softly from the movement. Olivia Hayes noticed instantly. "Emily." Another contraction came stronger this time. Emily closed her eyes and inhaled shakily while the noise of the collapsing gala faded into distant echoes around her. Cameras still flashed across the ballroom. Reporters still shouted questions. Nathan Cole still stood frozen beneath giant screens broadcasting the destruction of his empire in real time. But suddenly none of it mattered. "The baby," Emily whispered weakly. Olivia moved beside her immediately. "We need to get you back to the hospital now." Richard Carter crossed the ballroom within seconds, his expression changing for the first time all night from controlled fury to genuine fear. "How far apart are the contractions?" Olivia checked her watch quickly. "Less than 4 minutes." Emily looked up at her father through exhausted eyes. "It is too early." Richard placed one steady hand against her shoulder. "Look at me." His voice softened in a way almost nobody in the city had ever heard before. "You are getting through this. Both of you are." Across the ballroom, Nathan suddenly stepped forward despite the agents surrounding him. "Emily." The sound of his voice made her flinch instinctively. Nathan's face looked completely different now beneath the harsh camera lights. Not confident, not powerful, just desperate. "Please," he said quietly, ignoring the reporters pushing microphones toward him. "Let me go with her." Emily stared at him silently, while another contraction twisted through her body. For one dangerous second, Nathan almost looked like the man she married years ago. The struggling entrepreneur who used to hold her hand inside tiny apartments while promising they would build a future together. Then Emily remembered the footage, the medication, the lies, the way he reached for Vanessa first while she collapsed against a hospital wall carrying his child. Something inside her finally let go. "No," she whispered. Nathan's expression broke completely. But before he could say another word, federal agents guided him backward toward the exit while cameras captured every humiliating second. "Mr. Cole, did you attempt to poison your wife? Did Vanessa Blake act alone? Are you facing prison time?" Flashbulbs exploded non-stop as Nathan disappeared beneath the storm of reporters outside the hotel entrance. Emily never looked back. Rain hammered against the windows of the black SUV racing through downtown Chicago while Olivia monitored Emily's breathing from the seat beside her. Sirens cleared traffic ahead of them as Richard's security convoy cut through flooded streets beneath glowing city lights. Emily gripped the leather seat tightly through another contraction. "I cannot do this," she gasped. Olivia squeezed her hand. "Yes, you can." Richard sat directly across from his daughter, watching her carefully in silence. For years he believed protecting Emily meant controlling her future, choosing the right schools, the right friends, the right life. But tonight, watching his daughter fight through betrayal and heartbreak while carrying new life inside her body, he realized something painful. She never needed control. She only ever needed someone who stayed. St. Matthew Medical Center looked completely different now compared to the night before. Police officers stood near every entrance. Reporters crowded behind barricades in the pouring rain, while helicopters circled overhead like restless shadows across the storm clouds. The moment Emily's SUV arrived, cameras exploded into chaos again. "Mrs. Carter, are the allegations against Nathan Cole true? Is your father pressing charges? Are you in labor?" Security rushed Emily through a private entrance while Olivia and nurses guided her toward the maternity floor. The contractions were stronger now. Faster. The soft blue lighting of the hospital corridor reflected against polished floors while distant monitor sounds echoed through the quiet wing. Emily suddenly stopped walking halfway down the hallway. Richard turned immediately. "What is wrong?" Emily looked toward room 814 at the far end of the corridor. The same room where everything changed. The same hallway where she realized her marriage had already died long before the scandal became public. Tears filled her eyes quietly. "I used to think losing Nathan would destroy me," she whispered. Richard stepped closer slowly. Emily looked down at her stomach as the baby moved gently beneath the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. "But all he really did was show me who he was." Silence settled softly around them. Then Richard carefully kissed the top of her head for the first time in years. "And now," he said quietly, "the whole city knows too." A nurse rushed forward moments later. "Dr. Hayes, we need you now." Olivia nodded immediately while helping Emily toward the delivery suite. Behind them, television screens mounted throughout the hospital lobby suddenly switched to breaking news coverage. Nathan Cole's stock had collapsed by 43% overnight. Federal investigators seized multiple company accounts. Vanessa Blake officially faced criminal charges. But upstairs inside the quiet maternity ward, none of that mattered anymore. Because while one empire was ending beneath flashing cameras and public disgrace, another life was just beginning behind a pair of white hospital doors. The delivery room lights felt too bright after midnight. Everything inside St. Matthew Medical Center had become quiet in that strange heavy way hospitals often do before sunrise. The chaos downstairs never stopped. Reporters still crowded the lobby behind police barricades. News helicopters still circled above the building. Financial analysts on television called the fall of Cole Enterprises one of the fastest billionaire collapses in Chicago history. But inside room 927, none of those voices reached Emily Carter anymore. Only the soft beep of monitors, the low murmur of nurses moving carefully around the room, and the sound of her own breathing growing harder with every contraction. Olivia Hayes checked the fetal monitor again, her expression focused but calmer now. "Heartbeat is strong," she reassured softly. Emily nodded weakly from the hospital bed, strands of blonde hair clinging to her forehead while rainwater streaked against the dark windows behind her. Richard Carter stood near the doorway wearing the same black suit from the gala, though now it looked exhausted somehow. Wrinkled. Human. His phone had not stopped vibrating for hours. Politicians asking questions. Attorneys discussing emergency injunctions. Board members from Cole Enterprises begging for private meetings. Richard ignored every single one. His attention never left his daughter. Emily looked toward him between contractions. "Dad." Richard stepped closer instantly. "I am here." She swallowed hard. "I never said I was sorry." The words caught him off guard more than any courtroom accusation or billion-dollar betrayal ever could. Emily blinked back tears slowly. "For leaving the way I did. For disappearing." Richard stared at her quietly beneath the fluorescent hospital lights. 7 years earlier, Emily walked away from her family after one brutal argument about Nathan Cole. Richard accused Nathan of loving ambition more than loyalty. Emily accused her father of trying to control her life. Pride destroyed both of them after that. Holidays passed in silence. Birthdays ignored. Years wasted. Then Richard finally exhaled softly and sat beside her bed for the first time since she entered the hospital. "Emily," he said quietly, "you do not apologize for believing someone loved you." Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. Another contraction hit hard enough to steal her breath. Olivia immediately moved closer with the nurses. "Okay," she said calmly. "Stay with me here." Emily gripped the hospital sheets tightly while thunder rolled outside the windows again. Somewhere deep inside the city, Nathan Cole sat alone in federal custody, watching his empire collapse one headline at a time. But here inside this room, another story was unfolding entirely. One built from survival instead of destruction. 40 minutes later, the maternity floor suddenly became busier. More footsteps. More voices. One nurse hurried inside carrying a tablet. "Dr. Hayes," she whispered urgently. "There is a situation downstairs." Olivia frowned. "What now?" The nurse turned the screen toward her. Live news coverage filled the display. Nathan Cole was being escorted from a police vehicle outside the courthouse when reporters began shouting new allegations. Illegal offshore accounts. Fraud investigations. Witness cooperation deals. Then the camera angle shifted suddenly toward Nathan's face. Exhausted. Pale. Broken. One reporter shouted above the storm outside. "Nathan, do you regret what happened to Emily Carter?" Nathan stopped walking. For one brief second, the cameras caught genuine emotion breaking through the ruins of his public image. "Every second," he answered quietly. The clip ended there. Emily looked away from the screen without speaking. Olivia handed the tablet back gently. "You do not need to think about him anymore." Emily rested one hand against her stomach as the baby moved again beneath the blanket. "I know," she whispered. And for the first time, she meant it. Another hour passed. Rain softened outside. The city lights beyond the windows blurred gold against the wet glass while nurses prepared the room for delivery. Richard stood silently near the corner, holding a tiny knitted baby blanket someone from the hospital gift shop brought upstairs earlier that night. He stared at the blanket like he could not quite believe it was real. Emily noticed and managed a tired smile. "You look terrified." Richard gave the smallest laugh. "I negotiated billion-dollar towers with less stress than this." Emily smiled weakly before another contraction stole the expression away. Olivia checked the monitor again and looked up quickly. "It is time." The room shifted instantly into motion. Nurses moved around the bed adjusting equipment while soft instructions filled the air. Emily's breathing turned uneven again. Fear flashed briefly across her face. Richard stepped forward instinctively, but Olivia stopped him gently near the bedside. "She needs calm now." Emily looked toward her father one last time before the nurses positioned around her. Richard met her eyes steadily. "You are stronger than the people who tried to break you," he said quietly. Emily closed her eyes as another contraction came harder than before. Outside the delivery room windows, dawn finally began creeping slowly over the Chicago skyline after the longest night of her life. The storm clouds started to break apart above the city while the first pale sunlight touched the glass towers Richard Carter helped build decades earlier. Downstairs, reporters still chased scandal. Investors still panicked over collapsing stock prices. Lawyers still prepared criminal cases that would dominate headlines for months. But upstairs inside the quiet maternity ward, Emily Carter heard something stronger than camera shutters or breaking news alerts. A newborn cry echoing through the room for the very first time. The newborn cry echoed through the delivery room like the sound of something sacred surviving destruction. For one suspended moment, nobody moved. The monitors continued their steady rhythm beneath the soft fluorescent lights, while rainwater slid quietly down the hospital windows behind them. Then Olivia Hayes smiled for the first time in nearly 24 hours. "It is a boy." Emily Carter collapsed back against the pillows, breathing hard, tears slipping silently across exhausted cheeks, while the nurse carefully wrapped the baby in a pale blue blanket. Tiny fingers curled against the fabric immediately. Alive, healthy, safe. Everything Emily feared losing still existed in front of her. Olivia gently placed the baby into her arms. Emily stared down at him in disbelief. His eyes remained closed while soft breaths rose and fell against her chest. The entire room suddenly felt quieter somehow, as if the chaos outside the hospital walls no longer belonged to them. Richard Carter stood near the foot of the bed, completely frozen. The billionaire who intimidated presidents and destroyed competitors without blinking now looked overwhelmed by a 7-pound newborn wrapped in cotton. Emily noticed immediately. "Do you want to hold him?" Richard swallowed hard before answering. "Are you sure?" Emily nodded softly. One of the nurses carefully guided the baby into Richard's arms. The older man held his grandson with surprising gentleness beneath the hospital lights, staring down at the child as emotion slowly broke through decades of controlled restraint. "Hello there," Richard whispered quietly. His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Emily watched him from the bed, while another realization settled softly into her chest. This was what family was supposed to feel like. Not fear, not manipulation, not loneliness inside luxury penthouses. Warmth, protection, presence. Olivia adjusted one of the monitors before stepping toward the television mounted quietly in the corner of the room. Breaking news still dominated every network. Analysts described the collapse of coal enterprises as catastrophic. Federal investigators continued removing documents from company headquarters overnight. Several executives had already agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. Then the camera shifted to live courthouse footage again. Nathan Cole emerged surrounded by attorneys beneath gray morning skies, while reporters shouted questions across the crowded sidewalk. He looked exhausted now, older somehow, like the past 24 hours had stripped away every layer of polished confidence he spent years building. One reporter called out above the noise, "Nathan, have you spoken to Emily since the gala?" Nathan stopped walking. Cameras surged closer instantly. His jaw tightened before he answered quietly. "No," another reporter shouted. "Do you believe she will forgive you?" Nathan looked down for several seconds before speaking again. "I do not think I deserve that anymore." The clip ended there. Emily stared at the television silently while Richard switched it off without a word. The room returned to peaceful quiet except for the baby's soft breathing. "You do not owe him your attention," Richard said gently. Emily looked down at her son sleeping against her chest. "I know." And again, she meant it. Hours passed slowly after sunrise. The storm finally disappeared beyond the Chicago skyline, while pale golden sunlight filled the maternity suite for the first time since Emily arrived. Nurses moved quietly through the hallways changing shifts. Coffee carts rolled past distant elevators. Life inside St. Matthew Medical Center continued normally again, while outside the entire city obsessed over scandal, betrayal, and the public destruction of one of America's rising billionaire stars. But inside room 927, something entirely different unfolded. Healing. Richard sat near the windows holding a stack of legal papers he had ignored for nearly an hour. Emily noticed. "You were supposed to be running a billion-dollar empire right now." Richard looked toward her and surprisingly smiled. "Today I am busy with the important one." Emily laughed softly under her breath for the first time in what felt like years. The sound surprised both of them. Then her phone vibrated quietly against the bedside table. Olivia glanced at the screen first. Unknown number. Emily hesitated before answering. "Hello." Silence filled the line for several seconds. Then Nathan's voice came through weakly. "Emily." Richard immediately stood from his chair, but Emily raised one hand, gently stopping him. Nathan sounded different now. Smaller somehow. "I heard the baby is healthy," he said quietly. Emily looked down at her son sleeping peacefully beside her. "He is." Another silence. Then Nathan exhaled shakily into the phone. "I do not expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know something." Emily said nothing. Nathan's voice cracked slightly. "The moment I saw you collapse in that hallway, I realized too late what I had become." Emily closed her eyes briefly. Not because she still loved him, because once upon a time she did. Nathan continued softly. "I spent years chasing power until I could not recognize myself anymore." Tears gathered quietly in Emily's eyes, but her voice remained steady. "And now?" Nathan paused a long time before answering. "Now I wake up knowing I lost the only thing that actually mattered." The line went silent after that. Emily slowly lowered the phone onto the blanket beside her sleeping son. Richard looked toward her carefully. "Are you all right?" Emily stared out the hospital windows where sunlight reflected across the Chicago skyline Nathan once believed he owned. Then she kissed the top of her son's head gently and smiled through exhausted tears. For the first time in a very long time, she whispered, yes. 3 weeks later, the city still could not stop talking about the fall of Nathan Cole. Every morning television screen in Chicago replayed the same footage from the Grand Aurora Gala like it had already become part of local history. The hospital surveillance videos. The federal agents entering the ballroom. Vanessa Blake being escorted through flashing cameras and handcuffs while investors abandoned the event in silence. Analysts called it one of the fastest corporate collapses in modern business history. But inside the Carter estate overlooking Lake Michigan, none of those headlines mattered much anymore. Morning sunlight spilled across the massive windows of the nursery while Emily sat quietly in a rocking chair, holding her son against her chest. The baby slept peacefully wrapped in a cream-colored blanket, completely unaware that his birth had changed everything around him. Emily looked different now, stronger, not because the pain disappeared, because she survived it. A soft knock came at the nursery door before Richard Carter stepped inside, carrying 2 coffee cups. "You have been awake since 5 again," he said gently. Emily smiled faintly. "So has he." Richard handed her the coffee carefully before looking down at his grandson sleeping peacefully in her arms. "He has your eyes." Emily glanced toward the baby and quietly laughed. "Poor kid." Richard smiled too, but the warmth faded slightly as his phone vibrated in his pocket again. Another news alert. Another legal update. Emily noticed immediately. "Nathan." Richard hesitated before nodding once. "His attorneys accepted a plea agreement this morning." Emily looked down silently at her coffee cup. She had known this moment was coming for days. Investigators uncovered hidden offshore accounts, falsified medical reimbursements, and illegal financial transfers connected directly to Cole Enterprises. Several former executives testified against Nathan to reduce their own charges. Vanessa Blake reportedly agreed to cooperate too. In less than a month, the empire Nathan spent 10 years building collapsed completely. Richard sat near the nursery window overlooking the gray winter lake outside. "He will most likely avoid prison," he admitted calmly. "But financially, it is over." Emily remained quiet for several seconds before speaking softly. "Does he know about the baby?" Richard looked surprised. "He receives updates through attorneys." Emily nodded slowly. Somewhere deep down, she still struggled with one impossible truth. The man who nearly destroyed her life was also the father of the child sleeping peacefully in her arms. Some wounds did not disappear cleanly. A nurse entered moments later carrying the morning mail. "This arrived by courier," she explained while handing Emily a small envelope. No return address. Just her name written carefully across the front in familiar handwriting. Emily immediately recognized it. "Nathan." The room became very still. Richard's expression darkened slightly, but he said nothing while Emily slowly opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper. No legal language. No manipulation. Just handwriting. Emily unfolded the note carefully. "I spent years believing success meant owning the city. Bigger buildings. Bigger headlines. Bigger power. But the night I watched you collapse in that hospital hallway, I realized I built my entire life around the wrong thing. You once loved me when I had nothing. I repaid that love by becoming someone neither of us recognizes anymore. I will carry that shame longer than any sentence a courtroom could give me. Tell our son one thing for me someday. Tell him his mother survived everything they tried to break her with." "Nathan." Silence settled softly inside the nursery after Emily finished reading. Outside the windows, snow had started falling lightly over Lake Michigan, turning the skyline pale beneath the gray morning clouds. Richard finally spoke quietly. "Do you believe him?" Emily looked down at the letter for a long moment before folding it carefully again. "I think losing everything finally forced him to tell the truth." Richard nodded slowly. Then his attention shifted toward the baby beginning to stir softly in Emily's arms. Tiny fingers reached upward sleepily beneath the blanket while sunlight touched the side of his face. Richard smiled immediately. "There is the future CEO." Emily laughed under her breath. "Do not start." But the warmth inside the room felt real now. Not the artificial perfection of charity galas or billionaire penthouses. Something quieter. Safer. Emily stood slowly from the rocking chair, and carried her son toward the nursery window overlooking Chicago. Far below, the city moved forward exactly as it always did. Traffic crawled through downtown streets. Boats crossed the icy river. News vans still parked outside federal court buildings chasing scandal and downfall like entertainment. But Emily no longer felt trapped inside that world. She gently pressed one hand against the nursery glass while holding her son close with the other. Weeks ago, she stood in a hospital hallway believing her entire life was collapsing. Now the silence around her no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful. Richard joined her near the window without speaking. Together they watched the snow drift slowly across the skyline Nathan once believed he controlled. Emily looked down at her son one final time and softly kissed his forehead. "Some people lose their empire," she whispered quietly. "The moment they forget the value of the person who loved them before they had one." 6 months later, Chicago barely remembered the details correctly anymore. That was the strange thing about public scandals. The city devoured them loudly, obsessively, then moved on to the next headline before the damage fully settled. New stories replaced old ones. New billionaires rose while fallen ones disappeared behind courthouse walls and financial reports. But some moments never truly vanished. They just became quieter. On a cold spring afternoon, sunlight reflected across the Chicago River while people crowded the downtown streets beneath blooming trees and glass skyscrapers. High above the city, inside the newly renovated Carter Foundation building, Emily Carter stood near the massive windows of her new office, holding her son against her shoulder, while employees prepared for the foundation's opening ceremony downstairs. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint, coffee, and lilies delivered by local charities earlier that morning. Emily adjusted the sleeve of her cream-colored blazer while her son grabbed playfully at a strand of her blonde hair. "You are making this difficult," she whispered softly. A gentle knock sounded against the office door before Richard Carter stepped inside, carrying his grandson's favorite stuffed elephant beneath one arm. "Your board members are panicking downstairs," he announced dryly. Emily smiled. "Why?" Richard handed the toy to the baby immediately. "Because apparently the press turnout is larger than the mayor's re-election announcement." Emily laughed quietly under her breath before looking back toward the skyline outside the windows. 6 months ago, she could barely stand inside a hospital hallway without fear tightening around her chest. Now she was opening a maternal health foundation designed to support women facing abusive relationships, medical neglect, and financial isolation during pregnancy. The idea started quietly during sleepless nights, holding her newborn son while replaying everything that happened to her. The loneliness, the fear, the way power and money almost buried the truth completely. Richard funded the foundation without hesitation the moment she mentioned it. "No woman should feel trapped because she thinks nobody will protect her," Emily had told him once. Richard never forgot those words. Downstairs, camera crews filled the marble lobby while reporters gathered near the stage prepared for the ceremony. Some came for the charity announcement. Most came hoping to see the woman whose story once dominated every screen in America. Emily no longer feared cameras now. Not because the attention stopped hurting, because she finally understood something important. Shame belonged to the people who betrayed her, not the woman who survived them. Her assistant entered carefully. "Emily, there is someone asking to see you before the ceremony." Richard's expression hardened instantly. "Who?" The assistant hesitated. "Nathan Cole." Silence settled across the office immediately. Emily looked down slowly at her son, playing with the stuffed elephant in her arms. Then she exhaled softly. "Let him in." Richard stepped closer immediately. "Emily," she gently touched his arm. "It is okay." Moments later, Nathan entered the office quietly, wearing a dark navy suit that no longer carried the effortless confidence it once did. He looked thinner now, simpler somehow. The expensive arrogance was gone from his posture entirely. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Nathan's eyes immediately found the baby in Emily's arms. Emotion crossed his face so quickly he could not hide it. "He is bigger," Nathan whispered. Emily nodded calmly. "His name is Oliver." Nathan swallowed hard at the sound of his son's name. "That is a good name." Richard remained near the windows, watching carefully, but saying nothing. Nathan finally looked toward Emily fully. "I heard about the foundation." Emily adjusted Oliver gently against her shoulder. "We open in an hour." Nathan nodded slowly before reaching into his jacket pocket and placing a small envelope onto the desk between them. "This is the final transfer agreement," he explained quietly. "Everything left under my personal ownership has been signed over into a trust for Oliver." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "That is not a small amount of money." Nathan gave a faint, humorless smile. "Compared to what I lost, it is nothing." Emily stared at the envelope without touching it. "Why are you really here, Nathan?" The question lingered heavily between them. Nathan looked toward the skyline outside the windows before answering softly. "Because 6 months ago, I watched the worst parts of myself destroy the only real thing I ever had." Emily remained silent. Nathan's voice lowered further. "I spent years chasing power because I thought being feared mattered more than being loved." He finally looked directly at her again. "I know now how wrong I was." Oliver suddenly laughed softly in Emily's arms, reaching toward the sunlight spilling through the office windows. Nathan stared at the child with visible heartbreak before stepping backwards slowly toward the door. "He deserves better than the man I became," Nathan said quietly. Then his eyes shifted toward Emily one final time. "But he deserved a mother exactly like you." The room stayed silent after he left. No dramatic music, no screaming, no revenge left unfinished. Just the soft click of an office door closing somewhere behind them. Emily walked slowly toward the windows overlooking Chicago while Oliver rested peacefully against her shoulder. Far below, reporters and cameras waited for another story about scandal, survival, and public downfall. But Emily no longer belonged to that version of her life. Richard stepped beside her quietly. Together they watched sunlight spill across the city Nathan once believed he owned. Emily kissed the top of her son's head softly, while the noise of Chicago moved faintly below them like distant waves. "Some men lose everything they built," she whispered quietly, just to finally understand the value of the woman who stood beside them before they had anything at all.